Hi, welcome to part 3 of my series on the Rincon Hills in southern New Mexico. In this video, I'm going to go back and concentrate again on the southeast corner of the hills, where in part 1 I showed you these very Asian looking figures. I also showed you this other guy, and in part 2, along the freeway, I showed you some more real complex works of art. If you're wondering why this stuff is here, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that people were flying. There's evidence in prehistoric art from around the world. Some of these pieces of art show people wearing really heavy, thick outfits and helmets, and some have different breathing devices. Some are more simpler single sets of wings. But they could also be quite complex and have an inner wing and then a parachute behind that was controlled by all these different strings and handles. You can see here the Maya had some of these really large devices that have an inner wing that was then hooked to a parachute behind it. And I wanted to point out the Mayan picture at the top showing these people getting ready to paraglide during an eclipse. And because archaeologists didn't know what to think of this, they made up some real lame ball game that's kind of like soccer, that there's no evidence anybody ever played ever. And this glyph in southern New Mexico shows what I was talking about, a guy that has an inner wing and a chute behind him, and he's controlling it by this bone or a stick in front of him. So if you ever wondered why people built the Nazca lines or the Intaglia in California or any of this other geoglyph artwork, it's because they were flying. And it's real evident if people would just look at it and analyze these things as real objects instead of gods and goddesses. Archaeologists always turn to the mythological when they're trying to explain these things. So quickly I want to run through this area and show you how each one of these different shadings in the landscape depicts different faces and heads and are parts of different glyphs and ways to look at this. As I go through, you can see there's different heads and faces, and every little scrape is a man-made feature out there. And so there's like face inside a face inside a face. And these two faces here appear to be kissing, something I've seen a couple times in this area. Again, you can look at them different ways. Faces to the profile, faces 3/4. This one in profile is pretty scary. It has this big head of hair above him. And scale up again, large heads and faces, down to each little hill and scrape having again another little glyph and an area that again might be a guy that's paragliding. At the top there's a face facing to the right, looks kind of like John Lennon. And it's also a fainter face there. And then this figure at the bottom looks the other way too, and could be a bound prisoner, or he could have goggles on and be paragliding. You flip it around, there's this really huge head, looks very classic, almost Roman-ish. And then there's a guy, looks like he's in a burial shroud on a board, being carried by other people. And I'm starting to find these funerary themes in some of these glyphs. And again, faces, close and far. Look in the middle, you can see that really the dark area, this mouth coming out at you of an animal. Looks angry. And then all kinds of other different ways to look at it. Two figures facing off. The one on the right appears to be a fairly old woman with still a figure. And then other faces. Ways to look at it. There's so much going on, sometimes hard to see it all. And then when you zoom out and look at a larger scale, it forms a big sort of iguana-looking face and a seated figure with the head at the top around the quarry. If you look at stuff facing to the left, the quarry that looks like a bird one way looks kind of like a fluffy, long-eared dog, and some other faces. Every little gradation in the shading is another figure. And if you flip it around to the right of the quarry, there's some whiskered creature, could be a catfish or a rat, and then there's other faces on the other side. Zoom out and look at that for a while if you want and see what you can see. And then finally, let's zoom out and look at some larger scale faces on the landscape. Each one of these ridge lines creates another figure and face. So you might have noticed in these videos that these glyph systems I'm showing you appear to be sitting on Interstate 25, as if it's a baseline for all these figures. And I think it is. I think there was probably a fairly large prehistoric canal in this area running right where the freeway is. Again, I think we reuse so many prehistoric features that we don't even know it. If you zoom out and look, this whole valley to the north, it creates this large watershed that runs into the Rincon Arroyo. And a dam here at this arroyo, you could then run the water to the west and bring a whole lot more land into irrigation. So you always want to keep water as high as you can. You can also see that I've labeled all this area as different fields, and you can see all the different lines denoting different sections of land, and it's all prehistoric where they cleared the land. There's no fence lines, it's not ranching, this is all prehistoric activity. So watch my video on prehistoric agriculture in southern New Mexico, because I go into these field systems a little more. Just forget what archaeologists say. They don't know anything about what was happening out here prehistorically. It's all written in these glyphs, and it shows that the 7 tribes of the Aztec came from all over the world, and that this wasn't indigenous development. And therefore, there were technologies from all over the world that we can't imagine were here. I see indications of things like gunpowder and Greek fire and horses and beasts of burden, wheels, all kinds of different technology right here in southern New Mexico. So open your mind up, forget anything anybody else has said. There's a whole different explanation for our prehistory.